So I'm going to go on to the next event that I've chosen on my list, and that's it's time to match an organ request to the available organs, the organs we have in inventory. So once again, I'm going to start by drawing a circle. I'm not going to label it, just to represent the process. So the first question that we always ask is, how do we know that it's time to match an organ request to available organs? Well, we know because we have an organ request that hasn't yet been filled. I'm going to put organ request here as an object. Remember, we received the organ request from the hospital. And I'm going to find the next available unfilled organ request. And I'm going to put unfilled here. So how do I know that it's the next available? Well, I'm going to base it on the time that we received it. So if we look at this process here, and we look at some of the data that we needed initially, we said, well, organ type, blood type, deadline, a few things like that. Now, as we go to this process, and we're dealing with an event that's trying to match a request to the available organs, how do I know it's unfilled? Well, I know it's unfilled, and here's where data attribution comes into it again. We attribute the data that we find necessary to the object it best describes when we discover, in the process that we discover that we need that data. And I now know that we needed to have date and time received. I don't have to discover that over there in the other process. As long as I discover it somewhere, and I've discovered the need for that data here. So based on the next available organ, and based on whether it's been filled, I'm going to put date and time, and I'm going to call it reserved. So if this organ request was, I'm not going to call it reserved, I'm actually going to call it filled. For now, they have to work with something. It doesn't matter if it's right at this point in time, it matters that we have the information, we can correct it as we go along. So it hasn't been filled and it's next available, so I find that. And now I have to try to match that against the available inventory. Well, our inventory consists of organs. So I'm going to see here if there's a match. So I'm going to query against organ. I'm going to do a query and a response to see if there's a match against the matching criteria that we looked at earlier, the organ type, the blood type, and so on and so forth. And we did attribute that data originally in the first process. So I'm going to now see if there's a match. And I'm going to put match with a question mark here. And I'm going to do a query and a response. Now, you'll recall that we always deal with a negative first. So the two possible answers are, yes, there is a match. The other one is, no, there isn't a match. So the question now becomes, well, when do we look again? Do we just keep looking? If so, how often do we do that? Well, again, we don't want to look at the technology that's going to be deployed to support this. We want to look at it sort of in real time, if you like. And so we just keep looking until we find a match, or we've encountered the deadline for the organ request. Remember, we had the deadline attributed to that earlier? So we just keep looking because organs are continually populated. They come in from suppliers, remember we said that, and they keep populating this database. So as they show up, we keep looking to see if there's a match. If there's no match, we just keep looking. There's nothing here for me to say. I don't have to tell anybody that we don't have that filled yet. If there is a match, the question becomes, what do we want to do about that? Well, clearly we want to make sure that no one else can get that organ. We don't want somebody else coming in with another request, sort of 1 nanosecond later and then grabbing that organ. So what we're going to do is we're going to reserve the organ. And I'm just going to put reserve here. And here I'm going to attribute a piece of data to support what we're doing. And that is date and time reserved. So now, based on the organ request, we find the next available request that is not yet filled. We look at our organs in our database, our record of organs, to see if there's a match. If there is a match, we reserve that organ so we can then connect it to that request. And if there's not a match, we keep looking until the deadline. So the question then becomes, what do we do when there's a deadline, when we reach the deadline? Remember here, we had previously attributed deadline to this one. What do we do then? Well, we submitted that to our subject matter experts. We asked them, what do you do when we reach the deadline? Well, we just tell the member hospital that we've reached the deadline, we haven't found anything. So I'm going to put hospital here again. And I'm going to tell them that we've arrived at the deadline. I'm going to put deadline arrived. And to be able to tell the hospital, I have to know who the hospital is that that organ request belongs to. So I'm going to put hospital here as an object. Otherwise, I won't know who that request belongs to. And I'm going to bring in the hospital data so as I can tell them that the deadline has arrived. You'll notice that I didn't label this data flow because we're looking at just general hospital information. We don't have to clarify that. I don't clarify it in the narrative what we're looking for. The question now is, do we want to remember that we've told them that the deadline has arrived? And I think, again, the answer is yes. And I'm going to put it right here. And I'm just going to put here, hospital advised of the deadline. Okay, so the data here that I'm going to use to support that is going to be date and time, hospital advised of no match. Okay, and the no match is based on the deadline. Okay? It's not based on looking once and not finding anything. So date and time, hospital advised of no match, it's based on the deadline. I'm not going to worry about having specific data item names. That's a technical exercise that somebody else can go through. Programmers can decide that. I'm just going to put it in plain language here. So we'll keep track of that. Now, if we do reserve an organ and we have found one, the question there is, and we are remembering that, the date and time of the organ is reserved for that request. Do we want to tell the hospital that we found the match? And again, if the answer is yes, we'll have the data flow going out here, and here's our hospital information about this request, and we're going to tell them that we found a match. Just like that. Okay. Do we need to tell them, or do we need to record the date and time that we found a match? And the answer is no, we don't, because the organ that we have linked to that organ request record has date and time reserved. So if we have the date and time reserved here as part of the organ that's joined to the request, which is joined to the hospital, then we know that we've told them, because it says so in the diagram. So having said that, it's time to match an organ request to available organs. the way we've looked at it is find an organ request that's not yet been filled, that's next in line. Search for a matching organ based on the criteria established when we received the request. If we don't find a match, keep looking until we either do find a match or we reach the deadline. Once we reach the deadline, tell the hospital and remember that we told them as well. Once we do find a match, reserve the organ for that request for that hospital and tell the hospital that we've got the match. Everything is done at this point. And all we have to do now is write it up pretty well the same way that I just said it. Now, then we give this a name. And what are we doing? Looking from the inside out. What we're doing is find available organ. Now you might say match to an organ or some other term like that, and that's okay, as long as it's clear and concise in terms of what this process is about. Now that we have the process, we have some new data attributes here, we have some new data attributes here, we have some data flows, we've written a narrative, and we've given it a name, looking from the inside out. Now we're going to go on to the business rules table for this diagram.